Skip ahead about 40 seconds if the resources I've been giving bother you. There is a crisis text line set up for those suffering from anxiety or depression. Text 741-741 for help. If you are experiencing suicidal thoughts, please call the National Suicide Hotline at 1-800-273-TALK or 8255. If you are suffering from domestic violence, please call 1-800-799-SAFE or 7233 or dial 911. The Trevor Project has a hotline for young LGBTQ people who are struggling. Call 1-866-488-7386. Remember, you are not alone. I'll have international resources as well as these U.S. numbers in today's show notes. Southern Fried True Crime covers cases that are not suitable for young listeners, and there may also be some explicit language used. Listener discretion is advised. When we think of family annihilators, our minds often conjure up the horrific headlines of the tragic murder-suicide type. A husband and father kills his entire family, even pets, before killing himself. Friends and neighbors initially express shock at this aberration happening in their ordinary lives. And then we slowly learn about red flags, often signs of mental illness or distress. These stories are depressingly more common. And I have covered a few annihilators that I've called narcissistic. It's a husband or father who destroys his family for selfish reasons. Often he has a new love interest and doesn't want to be burdened by alimony, child support, or even the children themselves. The people he used to love stand in the way of what he wants. In today's story, I suppose the killer could be called narcissistic, or even a sociopath. Even though that word is no longer preferred by medical professionals, it is still a succinct word for a type of personality we have come to understand. His mental health was called into question, but the more salacious headline when he went to trial was Porn Obsession Murder Trial. And he was not the patriarch of the family. He was a son. And not a troubled young teenager, but an almost 30-year-old man who people still called a spoiled brat. A case of arrested development. A young man with a family who tried to solve his problems, tried to keep him out of trouble. They loved him, and they tried to set boundaries. And for that, he executed them. Welcome to episode 107, Cold-Blooded Annihilator, Grant Amato. The Amato family lived in Chuluota, Florida, a rural unincorporated community of about 2,500 people. It's part of the Orlando-Kissimmee Metropolitan Statistical Area, and it is about 30 minutes east of Orlando and 30 to 45 minutes from several beaches, most notably Cocoa Beach. Chuluota derives from a Native American Creek word meaning Isle of Pines, Pine Island, or Land of Lake and Pines. Some locals also claim it means beautiful place. This is because the community of Chuluota surrounds Lake Mills, a 50-acre park in southwest Seminole County. With sandy beaches and a mixed hardwood swamp, the lake is a popular recreational attraction in the area. Robert A. Mills, an early developer of the community, named the lake after himself and is credited with choosing the lyrical name of Chuluota. Some believe it was the name of the original Seminole village located there. It was first settled after the Civil War, mainly by North Carolina refugees. The land was bountiful with plenty of fish, wild hogs, and deer. The settlers formed cattle ranches, orange groves, and a sawmill from the forests of pines, and a spur line for a railroad was built in the area in 1910. It was supposed to become a boom town, to rival Orlando as the center of trade. But several setbacks stopped the small area from growing. The Great Freeze of 1894 and 1895 decimated the citrus industry. And Chuluota was also hit hard by the Great Depression in the 1930s. The population dwindled down, even though in the 60s, developers took an interest again as Disney World was being planned close by. But Chuluota remains small and it has an exclusive feel, even though the demographics do not necessarily reflect great wealth. The Amatos, however, were well off. They owned a really nice home on an almost 3-acre property on Sultan Circle in Chuluota. All of the homes on Sultan Circle are worth over $500,000, and today, the Amato home is estimated a bit over that. It's a 2-story home with 5 bedrooms and 3 baths on a secluded lot where the master bedroom overlooks the screened-in pool. It also has a 2-stall barn and a professional riding ring. That's because 61-year-old Margaret Amato, known to friends and family as Peggy, had a passion for horses. 10 years before tragedy struck her family, she rescued a brown former racehorse named Lady that was neglected and often wandered onto her property. She rode Lady every day from her home to Miracle Lane Stables where she boarded her. She patiently rehabilitated the horse despite being bucked off by Lady many times. She took care of the elderly racehorse until she died, and then stayed close to the owners of the stable, visiting other horses. Born in July of 1957, Margaret was from Walnut Creek, Florida, and graduated from the College of Marin. She worked as the client operations manager of the healthcare division of Nuance Communications. She married Chad Amato on April 11, 1987. It was her second marriage, and she had one son named Jason from her first marriage, who Chad adopted as his own son. Chad was born in July of 1959 and attended the University of Florida, becoming a pharmacist, just like his father. And he went on to work at CVS. On a Facebook post, he described his wife as, quote, a soulmate on the same spiritual wavelength. She is the moon to my sun. Chad loved being outdoors. He was an avid hiker and also loved climbing and cycling. He has been described as caring, encouraging, and a wonderful husband and father. People speak of Margaret in the same way. She was sweet, helpful, and compassionate. She was also extremely intelligent and was known as a great mentor to many. She had a calming nature, which was probably why she was so good with troubled horses. Her Facebook page has many photos of her beloved horse Lady. Chad and Margaret had 2 more sons together, Cody and Grant Amato. Cody was born on September 22, 1987, just 6 months after his parents' marriage. Grant came along about a year and a half later on May 20th, 1989. All of the boys were close growing up, but Cody and Grant were extremely close and shared many of the same interests. They liked to watch anime together and were on a competitive airsoft team called Remedy for a while. It's a competitive team shooting sport. As the kids grew up, the Amatos were known as a football family because they went to every home Florida Gators game. Grant would later say he and his brother Cody were inseparable. At Timber Creek High, they both joined the weightlifting team and both decided they were going to nursing school. And then they both wanted to go on to become a nurse anesthetist. Grant said they planned on buying matching BMWs and living in their parents' Chuluota home after Chad and Margaret retired to a home in Tennessee that they had already bought. Friends of Cody Amato describe him in the same reverent tones used to describe his parents. Caring, with a positive attitude. The best kind of person, one friend said. An amazing person who gave so much and had a big heart, said another. Cody graduated from the University of Central Florida with a Bachelor of Science in Nursing before he went on to become an APRN, a registered nurse anesthetist, in 2017, just as he had planned with his brother. He worked at Orlando Regional Medical Center, where he met his girlfriend, Sloan Young. Grant also graduated from UCF in Orlando with a nursing degree, though he failed his first RN license test in October of 2011. He passed the test on his second try and received his license in February of 2012. And then Grant went to Barry University from January 2015 to May 2016 before flunking out. He had been working to become an APRN just like his brother. Grant worked at the same hospital from 2011 to 2015 and then moved to another Orlando hospital for a year. In October of 2016, he started his third nursing job at Advent Health in Orlando. but he was fired in June of 2018. He was fired for stealing prescription pills and 8 vials of the powerful sedative propofol. It is also alleged that he gave it to patients without a doctor's order. Propofol is used to put a patient to sleep during general anesthesia for surgery and other medical procedures. It is the same drug that killed Michael Jackson. Grant was charged with grand theft, but the charges were dropped in November of 2018, likely because the hospital was avoiding the negative publicity. But not before his brother Cody had paid $8,000 for his attorney. And this is when Grant Amato started spiraling. He had failed out of graduate school and then he was fired. Now he stayed at home, gaming until dawn, and then sleeping the day away. Earlier photos show a wiry but muscled young man who looked healthy. By the time of his arrest, he was about 120 pounds, with sallow skin and hollowed-out eyes. He looked like an addict. And he was. His drug of choice was a Bulgarian webcam model named Sylvia. I'm going to pause now for a short commercial break. Grant had met Sylvia Venceslavova on a website called Cam Girls in June of 2018, right around the time he was fired for stealing prescription drugs. It was a website that charged by the minute, and soon, Grant was bleeding money. He spent thousands of dollars to send her clothes and sex toys, and in exchange, she would send him provocative and sexually explicit photos and videos wearing the clothes and posing with the sex toys. The Bulgarian model went by the more easily pronounced name Sylvia, and Grant told Sylvia he was a professional gamer, that he owned his own house and drove a BMW. He and Sylvia sent each other hundreds of text, photos, and videos. While he would later say Sylvia was his girlfriend, she actually charged 90 tokens per minute to talk to him. He typically bought 5,000 tokens at a time for $600. He would spend at least 4 hours a night watching Sylvia, about $2,500 a day. And in late 2018, his parents realized he had stolen about $150,000 from them. It's unclear how he stole all of this money, with the exception of a $65,000 loan taken against his parents' home. He also stole $60,000 from his brother Cody. There is evidence he used their debit and credit cards. He may have also taken out credit cards in their names, which makes more sense as he got away with it for several months. He and Cody both still lived at home, and some sources say that the Amatos did knowingly fund Grant in the beginning because he told them he was promoting himself on Twitch, a gaming live streaming network. However, with the work ethic in that family of medical professionals, I find this doubtful, unless they were humoring him. They did understand that Grant was troubled. When he was fired in June of 2018, the police were called to the hospital for a report of a suicidal person. They reported that they did not find Grant Amato met the Baker Act criteria, a Florida law that allows for involuntary institutionalization of an adult for a mental health crisis. Cody even paid for a $10,000 trip to Japan for him and his brother, trying to get him away from his problems. But in mid-December of 2018, after they found out about the stolen money, Grant's parents and his brother held an intervention for him. His parents said if he did not go through a 60-day treatment program for internet and sex addiction, they would kick him out of their house. Then on December 20th, Margaret and Cody reported Grant missing to the police. They told police that the last time they saw Grant was on December 19th at 12 p.m., and Grant had left the house without saying a word. Margaret said she watched him drive away. Shortly after leaving, Grant texted her saying he was tired of dealing with everything and he was just going to handle it in his own way. Margaret and Cody said that this was out of character for Grant, and they were, quote, 100% convinced he will try to harm himself. They said Grant was severely depressed and suicidal and was having, quote, strong feelings of worthlessness. And Grant did own several firearms and had access to many more in his home. His family wasn't even sure of his actual inventory of guns, so they couldn't tell what he had taken from the house when he disappeared. Grant had not been medically diagnosed, but he had gone to see a counselor with his family recently, and he had broken down emotionally, admitting to being severely depressed. They told the police he had recently lost his job and failed out of graduate school. Police entered Grant into the system as missing under endangered status. The officer reported that there was reasonable concern for his safety and mental health. The next day, Grant was found at his Aunt Donna's house in Apopka, Florida, by the Apopka police. It was about an hour drive from the Amato, Chuluota home. Grant talked to the police and said he needed a break from his mother and wasn't going to hurt himself. The police reported that he did not indicate a need for psychiatric evaluation, and he was removed from the missing persons list. But his family was still worried and wanted to keep an eye on him. They took turns taking 12-hour shifts watching Donna Amato's home. Donna started seeing strange charges on her bank account and thought Grant had hacked into it, but she later realized he had stolen her credit card information. Grant was later found to have photos of credit cards from Donna, his grandmother, his uncle, and one of his cousins as well. His family begged Donna not to call the police. Cody promised her he would pay back the money himself. Donna later told the press that her brother Chad broke down crying on the phone with her. She said he told her he had taken care of $150,000 worth of debt from Grant by remortgaging his house. Chad told his sister he realized he was putting off retirement for a few years, but, quote, "It'll be okay. I'll do it for Grant. I don't want him to go to jail." Chad had also let that fraudulent line of credit against his home go because he didn't want to report Grant. And his family did talk him into going into a behavior rehab facility, and he checked in on December 22nd. Cody had committed to paying the $15,000 for rehab, on top of the $8,000 he had already paid for Grant's attorney in the theft case. But Grant checked himself out of the rehab facility on January 4th, just 2 weeks into treatment, and went back to his parents' home. While Grant was in rehab, his family went through his computer and found Sylvia's contact info. They sent her a message telling her the truth about Grant, that he was not a wealthy professional gamer who drove a BMW. They told her he had stolen all of the money he spent on her from his family. Sylvia then cut ties with Grant. Margaret was particularly upset to find out that Grant had given Sylvia their home address. She had been sending him little love notes through the mail. When he got home on January 4th, his parents had laid down new rules for him if he wanted to stay in the house. His dad took him to the California Pizza Kitchen to sit down and talk, and showed him a handwritten list of rules. Grant had to get a day job and stop spending his entire night online. In fact, his phone data plan would be canceled, and Chad talked about actually getting him an old flip phone. Grant had to go to therapy, and his family would no longer be paying his debts. The note read, quote, "This is critical, as Grant, through his past transgressions, has relied on the knowledge that the family would not report him and would cover for him. Family relationship abuse beyond tolerance. This is a promise. You better heed the warning. It's real." And last of all, he was no longer allowed to talk to Sylvia. The list noted, quote, "You chose a stranger, physically non-existent, over family." He was also required to apologize to everyone in his family whom he had stolen from. His father told him if he didn't want to abide by these rules, he could move out and join the military, and the family would still not turn him in. But he pointed out Grant's now emaciated stature. At 5'10" and 120 pounds, he didn't think Grant would make it in the military. But despite this ultimatum, Grant kept getting online. He told his online porn group, quote, "I am unable to function normally without her. Not hearing her good mornings or good nights, not talking for hours a day. I truly loved this woman. I send her messages every day and get no response. She is my everything, and I will give her my life to simply be able to make her smile. And he was still trying to contact Sylvia through her DMs on Twitter. Reports say he used his mother's phone for this, though some sources say she allowed him to use the phone, and others say she didn't know. Her friends at the horse stable later said that she had a soft spot for Grant. It was hard for her to say no to him. It's unclear how much Sylvia responded to his private messages on Twitter, if at all. Once his family found out about everything and the money stopped, it's doubtful that she kept in contact much. No reports say anything about her responding to his messages. But Chad Amato found out that his son had messaged Sylvia on January 24th and confronted Grant, kicking him out of the house. Grant would later say his father grabbed him by the shirt and told him to pack his things and leave. You can understand Chad's anger and frustration, and also Margaret's sadness over the situation. Grant had abused his family. It wasn't just the money. He lied to them. He used them, and they did everything for him. At around 9:15 that night, Cody was at work and told his coworkers his dad had contacted him, saying he needed to come home. Some reports say that Chad called Cody to come home and help him kick Grant out of the house for good. But it's actually unclear if Chad called or texted Cody. Cody just told his girlfriend Sloan, who he worked with, that he was leaving early, and when she asked why, he said, quote, "Stupid fucking bullshit." Sloan said she texted Cody around 9:45 p.m. asking if he was okay, and Cody responded. He said he was okay and for her not to worry. But it's possible that message wasn't actually sent by Cody. I'm going to pause now to hear a word from today's sponsor. When Cody didn't show up for work the following morning, his girlfriend Sloan and his friend and coworker Chris Sisko were immediately worried. Sloan would later testify that Cody had been so worried about Grant's deteriorating behavior that he was afraid he would kill everyone. They called 911 at 9:17 a.m., and the police went to the Amato home to do a welfare check on the family. They found 2 cars in the garage and the house completely locked up. The windows on the inside were covered with paper. They knocked repeatedly, but no one answered. They even blasted an air horn. There was just grim stillness at the Amato home. Police finally broke into a back door into the home. They announced themselves, shouting as they walked through the house. First, they found 59-year-old Chad Amato lying on his back in a pool of blood in the kitchen. He had been shot in the back of the head first at an angle, but he wasn't killed. From the blood smears on the floor, it appeared he had crawled on the floor to the other side of the island in the kitchen. And then he was shot, execution style, in the back of the head. An autopsy confirmed he was face down for the second shot, but his body was found face up. Not only had he crawled after the first shot, he had been moved after the second shot. There was a semi-automatic handgun holstered on his right hip. But when investigators looked closely, the gun was positioned backwards on his hip in a way that a right-handed man like Chad would not have worn it. Also, his clothes were saturated in blood, but the gun and holster were clean. There was blood underneath the holster on the coin pocket of Chad's jeans. The gun had been put on him after he was moved. Moving around the house, the police found 61-year-old Margaret Amato in her office, slumped over her desk. She had been shot in the back of the head, also execution style. There was an empty wine glass on the desk. It looked as though someone walked up behind her, and she never knew what was coming. On the other hand, 30-year-old Cody Amato was found on the floor between the gym and the garage. There was a backpack and a handgun and holster near his body. He had been shot under his right eye. He had seen who shot him. He was lying in a fetal position, with blood coming from his eyes, but a large pool of blood was at his feet, not near his head where he had been fatally wounded. So Cody had also been moved. It was theorized he was coming in the door and was ambushed when he was shot because there was no blood splatter on the door where it should have been. There was blood on the door frame and jamb, and the door did not have a self-closing mechanism. It had to be manually closed. He also did not have his phone on him or his wallet and credit cards. Police later found that his credit card was used at around 2 a.m. to send another $600 to Sylvia. And even more grotesque, Chad Amato's right index finger had been wiped clean. Police believed that his finger was cleaned to access his phone with his fingerprint and then his bank account. Police found no evidence of forced entry, and the house was neat, orderly, and did not appear to be ransacked. Nothing valuable had been taken, and there were guns in the house, though the police suspected some guns had been taken from the scene. And no attempt was made at a cleanup. You can find the crime scene photos of this case easily online. There is a Google Drive on a Reddit thread with numerous photos. It was a horrific scene, particularly in the kitchen, where blood had pooled and had been smeared everywhere. Because of the December incident, police knew Grant Amato lived there and put out a bolo for him and his 1996 white Honda Accord DX. He was considered armed and dangerous. In the meantime, they went to see the oldest son, Jason Amato. He told the police that he wasn't actually that close to his family anymore. He only saw them 3 times a year, but he spoke to his mother once a week. He knew all about Grant stealing money from the family and how upset his mother was. He also knew all about Sylvia, the Bulgarian webcam model. Police searched Jason's home and car and looked him over. Not only was there no physical evidence, he had a solid timeline for where he was during the time of the murders. Police also questioned Sloane, Cody's girlfriend, who also knew all about Sylvia and the stolen money. She also said he had stolen guns from Cody and sold them. A neighbor told police she had heard gunshots between 8:30 p.m. and 9:30 p.m. on January 24th. Quote, "I heard them one right after the other, and I know it was less than 5 shots fired." I suppose because Chuluota is a rural area, gunshots were not that uncommon, and the neighbor didn't think to call the police. Police quickly thought to use Grant's Easy Pass to find him and subpoenaed his records. Florida has a system of highway tolls, and since he used his e-pass instead of cash, they found him quickly. He was found the next morning at a DoubleTree hotel in Orlando. He had checked in around 3 p.m. on January 25th, the day after the murders. Grant put up no resistance to being searched, and even told the police he had guns in the bag in his room. They searched the room and found a computer, flash drive, credit cards, and black leather gloves. The black leather gloves tested positive for gunshot residue. 2 of the credit cards were Cody's and 1 was Chad's. When they searched Grant's car, they found a handwritten letter inside which read, quote, "I said I'd take care of all of your problems at the house, and I have. No one will bother you again regarding this. Just please come home." Grant admitted to the police he had written the letter, but said he was quoting what Cody had said to him on the night of the 24th when he was killed. Even though Grant was searched at the hotel, when he was taken in for questioning, he was still not under arrest. Grant told police he had gotten into an argument on the night of the 24th with his father, who kicked him out of the house. He admitted to everything the police already knew, how he stole the money and sent it to the webcam model Sylvia. He told the police about the list of rules his father had given him and said that he had initially agreed to the rules, but he didn't think they were fair because he had a relationship with Sylvia. He said she was his girlfriend. He said that night, when his father grabbed his shirt and told him to get out, Margaret stayed in her office working, avoiding the confrontation. He said over the next few hours he packed his stuff and loaded his car while he and Chad still argued. Then he said he left and parked on a nearby road to talk to Cody between 9 and 9:30 p.m. He said Cody met him there and promised to go to the house and straighten things out. and he claimed that this was the last time he saw his family. But Grant's story and timeline kept changing. When asked how he randomly ran into Cody on that road, he admitted that he had actually waited at home until Cody got there and then talked to him. The interview lasted for a long time, with Grant saying he'd gone back to the house and didn't see anything unusual on the morning of the 25th. Police said that was strange because they were already at the house and it was a crime scene. Then Grant admitted he saw cop cars and news vans, so he drove to a nearby Panera Bread and used their Wi-Fi to search top news stories. He read about a shooting in his parents' neighborhood and said the house in the article looked familiar, but he didn't go back to the house because he, quote, just didn't want to know. He insisted over and over that he was not responsible for the murders, but he did admit that he was the only one with a motive and opportunity to kill them. The most bizarre part of this 7-hour interrogation is that 3 hours in, Grant still had not asked why he was there or being questioned, though he seemed to know his family was dead. A detective confronted him with the murders by pulling out crime scene photos and first showing him a photo of his dead brother. You can see this interrogation on YouTube. Grant puts his head in his hands and covers his face when he sees the picture of Cody. The detective asked him if he saw his brother this way before he left the house. Then Grant was shown photos of his dad and mom and asked the same questions. He kept saying no, he didn't do it. The police did not believe him and asked him if he had any remorse for killing his family. And Grant responded that his family had been blaming him for ruining their lives for months, so the police might as well blame him for their murders too. Poor, pitiful Grant. Also during this time, his brother Jason was allowed to come in and see him. He hugged Grant and asked him what had happened. Grant said he didn't know. Jason let him know he didn't believe him and said that if anyone had wanted to hurt the family, they would actually have gone after Grant. Then he stood up and said, "I'm going to pray for you, brother, because I can't pray for Mom, Dad, or Cody anymore." Grant was actually released after this interrogation, while the detectives kept investigating the crime scene and talking to friends and family. But he would only be free for a few hours before he was formally arrested and charged with murder. They theorized from evidence at the crime scene and what Grant had said that he'd been trying to set up Cody to make it look like a murder-suicide. Grant claimed Cody was the last one he saw and said he had planned to try and smooth things over with his parents. And then he planted a gun near Cody's hand and one in a holster on Chad's hip. But an autopsy showed from the bullet trajectory that Cody Amato could not have shot himself in the face. At the house, they found that the last activity on Margaret's computer was at 4:44 p.m. that day. In searching Chad's phone, they found that someone had searched how to erase an iPhone and then if you forget your iPhone password. This was around 11:29 p.m. the night of the murders. At 12:09 a.m., it appeared that Chad had logged into his bank account app on his phone with his fingerprint, and then transferred money to Grant's account. At around the same time, investigators found that Cody's phone had been connected to Grant's laptop. And police believed Grant was trying to erase his call log. Cody's phone had been supplying the data on the laptop until 2:06 a.m., and that was just a few minutes after the last $600 payment to Sylvia was sent. On Grant's flash drive and laptop, they found hundreds of pornographic photos and videos between Grant and Sylvia. In one that you can see on YouTube, a strung-out-looking Grant is filming himself, saying he is walking to the mailbox. He says to Sylvia, quote, "Please, pretty please send me one of your videos. I love it so much when you just send them to me. I don't like buying your stuff. It makes me feel weird." Sylvia then made a pout face and said, "Oh, you poor baby." Sylvia was definitely feeding into his addiction. Grant seems to be trying to tell her that paying her felt strange, as if she was his girlfriend, like he told his family. It's difficult to understand whether Grant was delusional or just determined. He was definitely addicted to online pornography, But that's not really a motive for murder. If you think Grant is really delusional and his family cut him off from his supposed girlfriend, you might see the murders as revenge. When Grant was arrested, a $750,000 bond was set. He was not allowed to use any money from the Amato estate, and no one was bailing him out of jail. So he stayed in jail until his trial 7 months later. The prosecution's case was simple. Grant killed his family because they had ruined his relationship with Sylvia when they told her he was a liar and a thief. They laid out all of the evidence prior to the murders. They showed how Grant had stolen money from his family to seem like a wealthy and successful man to the Bulgarian cam girl, Sylvia. Then they said over time, Grant became obsessed with Sylvia to the point that she was all that mattered to him. The prosecution theorized that Grant killed his father and brother because they had, quote, blew up his spot. Sylvia was a popular model on the porn site. She quickly moved on to other customers when she found out the truth about Grant. The prosecution said he only killed his mother because she happened to be at the house. They believed that he snuck back into the house and crept into his mother's office and shot her in the back of the head, right around 4:44 p.m. on January 24th, as she was found slumped over her computer. Then he waited for his father to come home around 30 minutes later. He walked around Margaret's office through the living room and surprised Chad in the kitchen. And then he lay in wait for his brother. The prosecutor said, quote, "For over 4 hours, with the bodies of his dead mother and father in the house, the defendant waits for Cody to come home. By any definition of the word cold, these murders were cold. I agree. After he murdered Cody, he set up the scene to make it look like Cody had killed their parents and then shot himself, including planting 4 bullet shell casings that did not match the guns near Chad and Cody's bodies. The investigators believed that the gun used to kill the Amatos was a handgun owned by a friend of Grant's. The gun had gone missing from his room after Grant had been in the house, about 2 weeks before the Amato murders. After killing his family, the prosecution showed that Grant had transferred money from Chad Amato's account to his own by using his dead father's fingerprint. He had also used his brother's credit card to make another payment to Sylvia. He was trying to talk to Sylvia again at around 2:53 a.m. after the murders on the Wi-Fi of a Publix nearby. There is no indication that Sylvia interacted with him again, and from what I can tell from the trial and other news sources, she never responded to any requests from Florida police to interview her. After Grant was arrested, he made several calls from the jail inquiring about his family's life insurance policies. He had also sent an email to a New York writer and filmmaker that read, quote, "If you happen to know any millionaires who would like to post my bond, I'd be eternally grateful and I'd give exclusive rights to you for my story." In spite of his show of grief during the interrogation, Grant was coldly trying to collect on his family's insurance policies from jail, and then trying to sell his story. The defense had a hard time in this case. In pretrial motions, they had asked the court for an MRI test and a psych evaluation on Grant Amato. Whatever they found, they did not use. Instead, they simply said Grant Amato did not kill his family, and all of the evidence was circumstantial. They pointed out how close Cody and Grant were, and that there was also no animosity with his mother. It was his father who gave the ultimatum and kicked Grant out of the house. His attorneys questioned the integrity of the crime scene investigation and pointed out the lack of physical evidence tying Grant to the murders. They posited that the Seminole County Sheriff's Department did not properly investigate the case because they had only focused on Grant Amato as their suspect. Grant did not testify in his own defense. But the attorneys were fighting a losing battle. It was a circumstantial case, but it was a strong one. And they could not find any alternate suspects for their theory. I think they might have done better going for a diminished capacity defense. Grant Amato did return to the house right after a fight with his father. He was enraged at being exposed to the woman he considered his girlfriend. and she was no longer speaking to him. They could have argued that he had a break with reality, but they would have needed an expert witness to testify to this, and we don't know what psychiatric testing showed about Grant. And furthermore, they would need Grant's permission to use this defense. He would have to confess to what he did, and he never did that. The jury deliberated for more than 8 hours before finding Grant Amato guilty of all 3 counts of first-degree murder. However, after 3 hours of deliberation, they could not reach a unanimous verdict to recommend the death penalty. The judge sentenced Grant to life in prison without parole. He is incarcerated at the Holmes Correctional Institute in Bonifay, Florida. This case is pretty famous. I'm sure many of you have heard about it before. I decided to cover the case because I found the motive to be so intriguing. Would a 29-year-old man really kill his family over a porn addiction? And if he did, wouldn't that indicate serious mental health issues? While it is obvious Grant was an addict, the annihilation of his family was premeditated to a point that no argument for diminished capacity would work. He wasn't crazy. He was cold. I kept thinking I would see signs of a sick young man who had snapped. But Grant Amato did not snap. He only cared about himself. He wanted vengeance and he wanted money. And he methodically made a plan to get what he wanted. So he laid in wait and coldly executed his entire family. The crazy part is that he seemed to think he would get away with it. Southern Fried True Crime is written and produced by me, Erica Kelley. The original graphic art is by Coley and Southern Fried's original music is by Rob Harrison of Gamma Radio. Southern Fried's audio is edited and mixed by Ches Gray of Gray Multimedia. Don't forget to subscribe to the other show I narrate, Fetal Abduction, a true crime podcast. And I'd like to remind you to come join my Facebook group. We share memes and have a lot of laughs. It's a really fun community and we'd love to have you. Hashtag no shit asses allowed. If you enjoyed today's show, don't forget to subscribe and please tell a friend or rate and review on iTunes. I'm also on most large platforms like Stitcher and Spotify, as well as Stitcher Premium, where you can listen ad-free. If you have any case suggestions, please email southernfriedtruecrime@gmail.com. I do not accept case suggestions on social media private messages. But please feel free to reach out by email. Not only do I get my most interesting and little-known cases from listener suggestions, I love hearing from you guys. Until next time, thanks so much for listening. Wash your hands, stop touching your face, and y'all take care.